So, the Sinner. This guy has been haunting my dreams for the past month and a half. Honestly, I was going to wait on talking about him because he deals with a lot of stuff I was going to cover in, I don't know, Dainslift's video, Venti's video, Ether and Lumine's videos. Just throwing out random names here. But oh dear Hoyoverse, how can you just dangle this sweet, juicy little lore nugget of a crystal right in front of my face and then expect me to not talk about him? And then 3.6 with all the dragon and Khaenri'ah lore drops, I can't stay quiet about any of this because they're all connected. I'm gonna take one last rain check on part 2 of the Sun and Moon series. I promise it's the last one. But don't worry, a lot of what we're gonna cover will set up our discussion about the heavenly principles quite well. So, with that being said, welcome to part 1.99 of the Sun and Moon series. I had to split this into 2 different videos because it was way too long and I had way too much to say, so here we are. Now, as this is a Sun and Moon entry, watching all the other parts will help you understand what the hell we're about to discuss, but don't worry if you haven't seen them. It's not entirely necessary for this video, but again, it helps. However, I do expect that you're all caught up on your Archon quests and Nahita's second story quest, Homecoming, and you better have finished the new world quest, Khaenri'ah of Good and Evil. If you haven't done any of these quests, don't watch this video, but if you don't give a flying fuck about spoilers, then you're in the right place. All right, with that out of the way, let's get the unhinged rambling started and talk about the Sinner. Some basic observations first. The Sinner possesses the power of the Abyss, but unlike the Travelers who get the heebie-jeebies from the creepy Crystal Man, Clothar Alberich is comforted by the Sinner's aura, and once actually in the Sinner's presence, he's compelled to bow just like Hilichurls. It's even more interesting when you realize that he's actually in a prayer pose. You've probably seen this pose on your character screen when you're about to level up your artifacts and cry because you don't get the stat you want. It was actually mentioned in a dev interview a while ago that praying imbues artifacts with power. It's kind of weird Clothar's compelled to do this in front of someone who claims they're not a god. Maybe the Sinner was once a god or something similar and just doesn't see himself as one anymore. Abyss Order lackeys are constantly referred to as things and its, despite once being human, so perhaps the Sinner is the same way. For those of you that have played Final Fantasy XIV, what the Sinner does to Clothar kind of reminds me of tempering, the weird religious fervor and all. You know, for someone who claims to hate the gods, Clothar sure did not hesitate to start treating the Sinner like one. Same with the Abyss Order, which Clothar would later create. They worship the Abyss itself and are spurned on by it. And we know that the Abyss has a will of its own. The Kitsune Saigu, one of A's long-gone friends, was speaking to the will as she lay dying, and descriptions for the Iniquitous Baptist and the Spiral Abyss also mention this mysterious will. Not to mention the little statuettes that several Abyss Order members carry around have a voice that communicates with them, whispers stuff about everything under the throne of heaven being destroyed. So yeah, the Sinner's a good candidate for the will of the Abyss. If you want more on this subject, I highly recommend you check out Aru Hiseki's video on the Sinner. Link will be in the description. Seriously, he makes some really interesting observations. Regardless of if the Sinner is the will of the Abyss, there's no denying this guy is hella powerful. He probably transcends fate itself. I'm kinda thinking the Sinner's the person who obfuscated our sibling's fate. In my case, that's Lumine. Like, he literally made her fate forbidden knowledge in a sense, since forbidden knowledge is supposedly a truth that can't be understood. Like fate, time and space don't seem to be an issue for the Sinner either, as he was able to move his location, and he was able to see the Traveler through centuries-old memories that leaked from the ley lines. Hell, he might be the reason why why Aether saw Lumine's memories in the first place. Not to mention, Clothar thought it was fate that they met the sinner at the right moment. I can't help but wonder if the sinner is omnipotent to a certain degree. And if he is, then my guess is he's using Irminsul in some way. I mean, if he did obfuscate Lumine's fate, then he must have had some power over Irminsul, right? Or at least power to change information in Irminsul. Dane did say the Abyss had tampered with the ley lines, and that honestly seemed to be the only reason we saw Lumine's memories in the first place. I'm gonna make a separate video on Irminsul, but all you need to know for this video is that it's basically the magic tree that connects all of Teyvat together through its roots, which are the ley lines. This tree is a repository for memories and information, and it seems to have something to do with time and fate. It also might be possible Irminsul can be used to be omnipresent and omnipotent to a certain degree, kinda like how Nahida was able to use the Akasha system, which is like a mini artificial ley line system, to achieve the same feats. She could project her mind through the system and be anywhere the system was active, despite being locked away. Seems like she could use the ley lines for the same purpose because she was able to communicate with us in the Golden Apple Archipelago. Funnily enough, the Akasha system could also predict someone's actions so long as it had enough data on a person's habits. This is kind of like predicting someone's fate, right? Now, if Irminsul can do all of these things, then the sinner might have some access to Irminsul, like he's a hacker or something. I don't know about you, but time, fate, meeting the sinner at the right moment, and Irminsul give me Istaroth, the god of time vibes. You really didn't think I wasn't gonna mention her at some point, did you? One of her titles is Kairos, which refers to opportune moments. She helped the Enkonomians after their fall from the surface world, and they referred to themselves as sinners living in a land of sinners. And I've speculated on her connections with Irminsul in previous Sun and Moon entries as well. It's strange that this guy is oddly reminiscent of someone as powerful as Istaroth, who also seems to be able to supersede the laws of the world in some ways. So what we're working with here is a talking crystal that says you to the rules of space, time, and fate. He might be the will of the Abyss. He can possibly manipulate Irminsul. He gives off some Istaroth vibes, and he may have once been a god, human, or both, or some other sort of powerful entity. So who is he? Well, if you've seen Island XD and Ashikai's videos, which will be linked in the description box below because they're great, or any of the other ideas floating around, you might think he's King Deshret, or the one-eyed King Irmin of Khaenri'ah, or both. I mean, Deshret and Irmin are besties, frickin' doublemint twins. They are so similar to each other, it's actually ridiculous. Both their kingdoms had highly advanced technology and were curb-stomped by forbidden knowledge they had a hand in bringing into the world. The symbol for Khaenri'ah is the 8-pointed black star, or sun, and Deshret's is a very similar looking 10-pointed black star, or sun. Each of them had their own sages. Hell, the desert, Khaenri'ah, and the Abyss have similar topographies, barren wastelands with barely any life. There are so many uncanny things that link them together, but for this video, I'm gonna be making an argument for Irmin being the sinner. Right now, I see Deshret and Irmin the same way I see Nahida and Rukkhadevata compared to Istaroth and the Moon Sisters, as parallels. I see the Goddess of Flowers in the same way too. Ashikai has a great video talking about her potential connections with Istaroth, though I'm sure you've probably already seen it. I'll still put a link in the description box below. I talk about symbolism, foreshadowing, and frame stories a lot on my channel, and I think Hoyoverse actively uses these techniques to tell us about characters that have yet to appear in the story, or about characters who have appeared but we know nothing about directly. They also do this to show us the direction the plot might be going in. I'm telling you, these patterns are super important for understanding the lore. Regardless of if the two are the same, Deshret is necessary to understand Irmin, so we're gonna talk about Deshret too. There's also someone else extremely important to understanding not just them, but even characters like our travelers and 3 others. This guy's like the glue that sticks them all together. If you're a Honkai fan, maybe you can figure out who they are, but we're not diving into that convo in this video. For now, let's jump right down the Irmin equals sinner rabbit hole. To start, why don't we define what sinning actually means in the world of Teyvat? Did you know the Academia outlined 6 cardinal sins that they believe are the source of all crimes in the world, and that Irmin and Khaenri'ah committed them all? These ancient sins are the following. 1. Interfering with human evolution. Evolution was talked about a lot in 3.6, and there was also talk of adaptation in Nahida's story quest. Evolution is often a result of adaptation, and at times they are the same thing, so the two terms go hand in hand. The new enemy, the iniquitous Baptist, evolved its extra limbs, and there's even a note you can find in the Khaenri'ah ruins underneath the new area that implies the power of evolution can even exceed that of the Abyss. And if the sinner whose power stems from the Abyss can help people transcend their fates, specifically other sinners like him, well, can't you consider that a form of evolution? Evolving beyond your current predicament? And Khaenri'ah was very invested in learning about the Abyss and taking control of it as well. Who knows what else they may have done to facilitate human evolution. 2. Tampering with life and death. Khaenri'ah created the art of Khaenri'ah, which creates life. According to Dainsleif, Khaenri'ah is one of the major reasons Khaenri'ah was destroyed, so we'll count that as a sin. 3. Delving beyond the universe. As we learned in 3.6 from an old note you can find, Khaenri'ah attributed its success to its ability to spy on the secrets beyond the skies, or in other words, the secrets beyond Teyvat. I'd consider that delving beyond the universe. 4. Investigating the origin of words. Remember the silver twig we got from Rukkhadevata? No. Well, part of it talks about the legend of a sage who hung himself upside down from Irminsul. Doing so gave him knowledge that allowed him to inscribe runes, control sacred words, and see the secrets of the cosmos. Most people think this sage is King Irmin because this story is identical to the myth about the Norse god Odin, who hung himself from Yggdrasil, impaled himself with his own spear, and lived on the precipice of life and death for 9 days and nights, all so that he could learn the mysteries of the runes. Irmin is thought to be one of many names of Odin, so I'm thinking Irmin must have somehow learned knowledge hidden by Irminsul by doing something to or at Irminsul, making a sacrifice. Not unlike how Deshret had to make a huge sacrifice in order to gain the knowledge he did. One of those sacrifices was the goddess of flowers. From whatever exchange Irmin may have done, maybe he gained the power to see into the past, maybe even the future. And I think the runes Irmin learned to write and sacred words he learned to control might have been Enochian. If you've ever taken a look at Abyss mages when they're talking to Hilichurls and also casting the spell to regain their shields, you can see symbols that belong to the occult Enochian language. This language was recorded in journals by John Dee and his colleague Edward Kelly back in 16th century England, and they claimed this language was divine in nature. They claimed it was passed down to them from angels and was the language of angels. If we assume that Genshin is using this reference faithfully, then the sacred words Irmin learned to control might be the language of angels. And you might have heard this already, but it's a popular idea that the Seelie race were like angels. There's a lot to suggest that they also were the divine envoys from thousands of years ago that guided humanity and relayed the will of the heavens. Funnily enough, according to the staff of the Scarlet Sands, Nabu Malikata, otherwise known as the goddess of flowers, told Deshret about how the world was created. He mentions that he no longer remembers the language she told him in, and I can't help but wonder if that language was the language of the angels? Genshin's Enochian. I don't know, but if Irmin learned this language, he may have passed down its secrets as the sinner to the Abyss Order. Either way, it seems to me like Irmin might have been investigating the origin of words, if those sacred words and runes he learned to control are the same thing. The last 2 cardinal sins are revering gods without acts of devotion and attempting the forbidden and fearing nothing. Khaenri'ah didn't worship any gods, allegedly, and some of them sure as did not fear the wrath of the gods. At least until it was brought down upon them. All this kind of makes you wonder what exactly got them destroyed by the heavenly principles, because they were presumably sinning long before the cataclysm and Celestia seemed to leave them alone, so what gives? What exactly was the trigger? Questions to ponder in the next video. But yeah, Khaenri'ah, definitely a land of silly little sinners, but we need a little more to establish a solid connection between Irmin and the sinner. As many have pointed out, the deathly statuettes, which Abyss Heralds, Lectors, and Black Serpent Knights carry around, appear to be in the likeness of Odin, and therefore perhaps in the likeness of Irmin. They're the same shape of the sinner, and the way the whispering voice of the statuette speaks makes it sound like a parent? Perhaps a father, which makes this Irmin sinner connection even more interesting because Odin is known as the All-Father, and kings are kind of like fathers to the kingdoms they rule, right? Sadly, we don't know much else about Irmin other than eventually his strength failed and was thus indisposed sometime during and after the cataclysm. That doesn't mean he's dead though. Maybe Irmin sacrificed his physical form and joined with the Abyss, becoming the Abyss itself. Deshret may have done something similar with his Golden Slumber project, which was basically just him trying to create a hive mind. It was part of his Overthrow the Gods plan. However, the book The Lay of Al-Ahmar, which is about Deshret, implies that he was seeking a way to abandon his mortal form. He let Apep consume him per their agreement, and she became a vessel for all the forbidden knowledge he absorbed himself. That doesn't mean his consciousness was consumed. Well, even if he is actually dead, I think there's a chance Irmin may have done something similar to Deshret. Maybe abandoning his physical form was always part of the plan and has something to do with why he was indisposed. There's one more place Irmin's name pops up that's relevant now more than ever. The Legend of the Shattered Halberd. Oh, this little book is so sus for various reasons that we're not getting into right now, but if you're curious, I highly recommend you check out Roosevelt's channel. She's got some great stuff, especially on Khaenri'ah. I'll leave a couple links to her videos in the description box below, but anyway, in this book, Irmin is the name of the first divine halberd created by the God King, the Celestial Emperor. Or he might be the God King, I'm kinda not sure. Either way, the divine halberd Irmin pierced what's called the Axis Mundi and connected the 9 realms. In the real world, particularly from a mythological perspective, the Axis Mundi can refer to the center of the world, or the thing that unites the realms of heaven, earth, and the underworld. It can be represented as a pillar, but frequently is shown as a world tree, you know, like the world tree Yggdrasil from Norse mythology that connects the 9 realms. We just learned from the Kvar in a world quest that Khaenri'ah had technology that allowed them to connect the realms. Realms could mean the light, human, and void realms we learned about in Enkanomiya, or it just means Khaenri'ah had access to virtually anywhere in Teyvat, or both, which would make sense given that the cataclysm which started from Khaenri'ah seemed to happen everywhere simultaneously. Having this tech also explains how Khaenri'ah was able to contact and visit Enkanomiya in the distant past, a place deep under the sea and far away from Sumeru. Actually, on that note, the Abyss Order uses a network of portals that connect to different places in the world, too. Paimon compared this network to teleport waypoints. And now that I think about it, didn't we also have to go through a bunch of portals to reach the center? I wonder if these mechanisms, the network the Abyss Order uses, and Khaenri'ah's technology to connect realms are all connected to each other. Which brings us back to the book The Legend of the Shattered Halberd. If the Irmin in that book is divine, because it's a divine halberd, and this is ultimately a reference to King Irmin of Khaenri'ah, then does that mean Irmin might be divine? Yes, actually I think that's the case. In fact, I think he's a lot like Aether and Lumine, and I'm not the first person to say that. And if he is, then it makes a lot of sense as to why he made Aether and Lumine his heirs, and it also means that he will likely be a lot like the Primordial One. I'm not going too deep into everything mentioned in the book Before Sun and Moon about the big wizard in the sky, but all you need to know for this video is this. The Primordial One invaded this world, which originally belonged to the 7 sovereigns, who were dragons. The Primordial One, being the little alien overlord that they were, overthrew the dragons with the help of its 4 shining shades, or clones, since it created shining shades of itself. Istaroth, the god of time, is one of those shades. After yeeting the dragons, the Primordial One and one of its shades created life on Teyvat. Or maybe it's more accurate to say they created more life, since life already existed in Teyvat. Now, before Sun and Moon gave us a potential name for the Primordial One, Phanes. I say potential because the book specifically says its name may have been Phanes, not that it actually was, which is a red flag if I've ever seen one. But for right now, let's just assume the Primordial One's name was Phanes, or that Phanes is at the very least similar to whoever the Primordial One is. On that note, Genshin Phanes is a lot like its counterpart from the Greek religion Orphism, androgynous with wings and a crown that hatched from a magical world egg. The Orphic Phanes is also described as a god of light and creator of daytime, and therefore is quite similar to a sun god. His name can translate to Lightbringer in Greek, which I mentioned in my unhinged rant at the end of part 1.5 in connection with Lucifer, whose name also happens to mean Lightbringer in Latin. That made me wonder if Genshin's Phanes is like Genshin's Lucifer, who I believe is Aether and Lumine, possibly the traveler from afar who married the first Seelie, if you guys know that story, which you should if you're a fan of this channel. In other words, the twins should be like the Primordial One, and if you look at them, you quickly realize they kind of are. The travelers are associated with light and the sun, the color gold, have wings, are each male and female, just like the Primordial One is said to be androgynous. They are aliens, like the Primordial One. They are like fallen angels and were accused of arrogation, which is what Lucifer is infamously known for, at least the Christian interpretation of him. And the twins are constantly called stars. Morning stars, to be specific, and oh hey, would you look at that, Lucifer is the morning star. Not to mention that while Aether and Lumine don't have crowns, they do have the fleur-de-lis on their designs, a symbol of royalty, and they've straight up been called Prince and Princess. And we know the twins were supposed to inherit their own world, according to Lumine's welcome card, which is interesting because the Primordial One should be like a king or queen of the world. The travelers are also masters of all the elements, and the Primordial One should be too, especially if the light element is just a combination of the other elements. So how much you want to bet the travelers are indeed similar to the Primordial One and its shades, and vice versa, like possibly being the same race, or even part of the same family? But it's not just the twins, there are more morning stars than just them, like Deshret and Irmin. Deshret's associated with the sun, he's literally a black sun. He's also associated with the color gold, was allegedly the frickin' avatar like the travelers, yada yada yada. Irmin also has subtle sun associations, especially since the dynasty he ruled was called the Eclipse Dynasty, or in Chinese, the Black Sun Dynasty. With this in mind, I want to focus on Deshret's relations to the Primordial One, because I think Deshret is supposed to be a parallel to the Primordial One. Same with Irmin, and therefore the sinner. Deshret's definitely a reference to the biblical King Solomon, right? King Solomon is regarded as the wisest king in the Bible, as he was blessed by God with wisdom. And in sources outside of the biblical canon, like Islam's Quran for example, Solomon had a whole bunch of powers bestowed upon him by God, like mastery over wind and all of the elements. And according to medieval occultist sources, he also enslaved demons, capturing them in bronze vessels. He even used them to build the first temple in Jerusalem, otherwise known as Solomon's Temple. In the Quran, these were jinn. And oh hey, would you look at that? King Deshret had a whole bunch of jinn under his command who helped construct his massive mausoleum temple thing. But you know what? The Solomon of Genshin should actually be the Primordial One. Well, most, if not all of the gods and archons that we know of are named after demons from the Lesser Key of Solomon. In non-canonical accounts, like the Testament of Solomon, these are are the demons that Solomon used to build his temple. Furthermore, the Ark of the Covenant was said to be housed in Solomon's temple. And the Ark of the Covenant contains the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses on the biblical Mount Sinai. I would like to remind you, the word Tevat, the name of Genshin's world, translates from Hebrew to Ark, or more specifically, Ark of. And who created the current Tevat and established a covenant with humanity? The Primordial One. It's kind of like the Primordial One and Deshret play the role of both God and Solomon, who received his wisdom from God. So, in Genshin, the Primordial One is King Solomon. The Ark of the Covenant and Solomon's Temple are the world itself, and the gods are demons enslaved by the Primordial One, supposedly. The Seelie race should also be the Primordial One's demons, perhaps the original ones, because if we parallel this with Deshret's situation, the Jinn were under his command. The Jinn are the descendants of the Seelies. Seelies were thrown out of heaven, so they're like angels that became demons. But aside from the King Solomon connections, we can connect Deshret to the Orphic Phanes, albeit in a roundabout way. We just learned that one of Deshret's names was Amun, which likely comes from the Egyptian god of the same name. Amun, whose name can mean Hidden One, was a god of air and wind, like Deshret, and was a king of the gods and primordial creator deity, like Phanes. He was eventually fused with the sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra, and during the period of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Ra increasingly became associated with the god of the underworld, Osiris, which is interesting because Deshret also has ties to life and death. He was called a guide of the living and dead in the Lay of Al-Ahmar. But if you've ever looked into Osiris, you'll immediately notice some very interesting similarities to the Orphic Phanes. Like Phanes, Osiris is a dying and rising god, which means that he dies and is resurrected later. Interesting, wasn't there a lot of talk about reviving Deshret in the earlier Sumeru Archon quests? Like, that was a big plot point and it turned out to be bogus. He wasn't being resurrected, but it makes me wonder if Deshret is indeed a dying and rising god like Phanes and Osiris. And if he is, maybe he did survive being vored by the angry dragon lady. But anyway, back to Osiris. Osiris's brother Set split him into several pieces that his wife Isis gathered in order to revive him. Interestingly enough, in an Orphic legend that is similar to the Osiris one, the Greek god of wine, Dionysus, was murdered, dismembered, and devoured by the Titans, only to be revived later on. Dionysus is considered to be an incarnation of Phanes by the Orphics, not to mention that Dionysus himself was identified with Osiris anyway. If Dionysus is an incarnation of Phanes and is also equated with Osiris, and Osiris is equated with Amun-Ra, well, here we are, back at Deshret, the Primordial One, and the likely Dionysus of Genshin, whose name I will not mention because this is not his video. Suffice to say, you'll find that a lot of mythologies cross over with each other, and Hoyoverse loves to take advantage of that. These connections are important, even if they don't seem like it. Which leads us to King Irmin and the god he's likely based on, Odin. Odin is a god of many things. Of war, wisdom, of the dead, of sorcery and magic, and also of outlaws, people who committed crimes or didn't agree with social norms. He's a relentless pursuer of knowledge, often self-interested and held little regard for the rules. This all falls in line with King Irmin of Khaenri'ah, right? Who ruled a kingdom of people that scorned the gods and the seven nations, people who were considered sinners. And Odin was also, wait a minute, a wanderer, which is basically a traveler? He was also a god of poets, and he was ascribed with feminine qualities at times, notably because of his practice of the magical art Satyr, which was mostly practiced by women and the gays. Now that's not quite androgyny, but I'll take it, he had some feminine qualities. But there's more. The name Odin and its Germanic cognates can be translated to Master of Ecstasy, and even Lord of Frenzy, or Leader of the Possessed. This fits Irmin, especially if Irmin is the sinner, who inspires this weird religious fervor in the people touched by his power. Those who become one with the abyss are driven on by it, and become addicted to it, elated by it. It's almost like they're possessed. But you know who else is a god of religious ecstasy and insanity? The Greek god Dionysus. Funny, the possible Dionysus of Genshin happens to be a bard, which is a poet, is androgynous, is low-key associated with death, runs a town full of orphans, and is known for rebellion, a lack of regard for rules, and his love of freedom from oppressive regimes. And, now that I think about it, there's a line from the book A Drunkard's Tale, which is about Seelies and wolves and a guy who tries to get a wolf drunk with wine. We'll dissect this book another day, but when the wolf drinks the wine, he compares it to the abyss. To quote, "What you call wine, we call the abyss." And oh look, we're right back at the sinner, and also the travelers, who Khaenri'ah compared to the abyss. Okay, I got one last dose of brain rot for you, I promise. You know this mural of Deshret? I know this might seem random, but just follow me for a second. When I first saw this, I thought the way Deshret was depicted was odd. There's his usual eye, right? But then there's also what seem to be wings, clouds, or air beneath him, and if you look close enough, he's got antennae. He kind of looks like a bug, which is weird until you realize he might be depicted as a crystal fly here. Crystal flies are shaped just like Deshret's crystal form, same with the sinner. But Deshret possibly being represented as a crystal fly makes me wonder if he did in fact have wings like the travelers, and also if he had horns. And the horns are what I really wanted y'all to focus on. The horns remind me of something I looked at while researching the Moon Sisters for Paimon's true identity, the Horned God. In Wicca, the Horned God is seen as the consort to the Triple Moon Goddess. He can be represented as a sun god, and is also a god of the dead. This fits Deshret well because he's got his own associations with the sun and death, and he had his own moon, the goddess of flowers, a Seelie who danced with the Moon Sisters. And like the Triple Moon Goddess, the Horned God is sometimes seen as a triple deity with three aspects that are complementary to the aspects of the Triple Moon Goddess. Hers are the Maiden, Mother, and Crone. I've talked about them before. But guess what his are? The youth, or warrior, the father, and the sage. And who's called a sage again? Irmin and Deshret, who was a king of sages. And like the crone, the sage is associated with the underworld. In fact, the Horned God is a god of the underworld. And where is Khaenri'ah located? Near or in Genshin's underworld, the abyss. What is the sinner possibly? The will of the abyss. And wouldn't you know it, those deathly statuettes, which might be in Irmin's image, which are in the exact shape of the sinner, have horns. But what does all of this mean? What does it mean for Irmin and the sinner to be like the Primordial One and the Travelers? What does it mean for him to parallel with Deshret and his desert kingdom? What does this mean for Khaenri'ah? Now, what I'm about to tell you may change how you view Celestia, the dragons and bishops, the Primordial One and its shades, and of course, how you view Khaenri'ah. Are you listening?
No.
Okay, King Irmin and all pure-blooded Khaenri'ahs are